The NRA has lost over 1 million members since allegations of corruption surfaced against its leadership. Plus, Ian McCollum on YouTube taking down silencer videos. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date on what's going on with guns in America. This week, we are talking about YouTube. So I kind of expect this podcast to do fairly well on YouTube, because since YouTube is one of the most popular topics on YouTube in my experience as a consumer on the platform and a producer of content. But to that end, we have one of the best gun tubers out there, Ian McCollum from Forgotten Weapons. Welcome to the show, Ian. Thank you again for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. You're far too kind, but it's fun to be back.
Yes. We did an episode last year, I believe it was. And so we're back again talking about YouTube's moderation practices after they had gone after, it's a fairly confusing situation, to be honest. They initially started taking down videos and even channels altogether that appeared to show content where a silencer or suppressor was attached to the barrel of a gun that was apparently viewed for some period of time. I think it was a couple months there as a violation of YouTube guidelines. And they even retroactively went back years to go after some videos on this. And then they changed their minds and reversed themselves. And now these videos are being re-added. These channels are coming back. You were directly affected by this. Is that right?
Yeah, almost all of us were. All the big gun channels and a ton of smaller ones as well. But yeah, myself definitely included. I had a video from 5 or 6 years ago removed without any warning and was given a channel strike warning. So the way the system works on YouTube is if you do something that is so flagrant that it requires content to actually be deleted off the platform, they give you a strike. And the first one's just a warning. Second one, you can't post for a week. Second one, there's some additional penalty. And the third one, they just delete your channel completely and irrevocably. Right. Well, mostly irrevocably.
Yeah, apparently
so I
not
got
irrevocably, I guess.
Yeah, irrevocably unless they decide it's not.
Yes.
That's actually a good description of a lot of YouTube's policies, or it's definitely this unless we decide it's not.
Yes. Yeah, and you see this even beyond the gun space, of course. This is one of the most common things that YouTube creators talk about is YouTube's sort of bizarre or inconsistent application of their own rules, and the way that they've changed them constantly to try to appease advertisers is a big topic of conversation among people who, use the platform to make their living, which is frankly quite a lot of people these days. It's the second largest website in the world, right? So, everything they do is going to have a pretty major effect, even if it seems like a minor change, on a lot of people. And in this case, it had an effect on not only your channel, but like you said, basically everyone in the gun space that's ever done anything about suppressors. And that included things like deleting entire channels of Kit Badger was one. Silencer Co.'s channel got deleted. A lot of Ammo Land's channel got deleted. Recoil Magazine's channel got deleted. Just completely gone over this issue. But then YouTube came in and said, we've made a mistake.
Oops. We didn't actually mean to do all that.
Yeah. We could probably tell a little bit from that reaction what you think of their reversal here. But let me give you the line that they told me. YouTube spokesperson, when I reached out for comment on the situation, said, it took a little while. They said they were they wanted to address the mistake that they'd made, and they started restoring a lot of channels and videos, including yours. But the quote they gave me was, upon review, we determined the videos in question are not violative of our community guidelines and have reinstated them. When it's brought to our attention that content has been mistakenly removed, review it and take appropriate action, including reinstating and removing associated strikes. So just give us your reaction to that.
I think my reaction to that is when they say when it comes to our attention, what they mean is when enough people make a big enough fuss that this might actually get noticed outside of the tiny minority of channels that we're doing it to, then we'll reconsider our decision and push back our plans to crush all this content to a later date when people aren't watching again.
Interesting. So
I'm getting pretty cynical about this stuff.
Well, to be fair, it was this, how many years of this sort of thing affecting your channel's reach and income over these sorts of policy decisions, right?
I've been using YouTube since 2011 or 2012. The problems of this manner go back to 2016 for me. Now, there's a cohort of YouTube gun channels who were on it a couple of years earlier than me, and maybe they were having issues even earlier. But for me, it's 7 years now of this sort of behavior.
Yeah, and as I alluded to earlier, this is something that affects very often channels of all sorts on YouTube, as YouTube sort of tries to continually adjust the sweet spot for advertisers, I guess, seems to be what stems from a lot of these issues. But it's certainly, especially in the gun sphere, it's even more severe, I think.
So one of the things that was particularly notable on this incident is, yeah, as you say, this sort of behavior is generally based around trying to sanitize and bubble wrap everything on the platform to satisfy the most potentially hesitant sponsors, advertisers. But YouTube has a very easy system for making sure that advertisements don't appear on content that might be controversial, and that is to simply demonetize videos. And that's usually been where the arguments and the issues are between creators and YouTube, which is to say creators being upset and having nothing that they can do about it, because there is no communication between creators and YouTube, to be clear. Like, I'm shocked that you were able to talk to anybody. I have 2.5 million subscribers. I have nobody at YouTube that I can talk to, literally.
And I'll be honest with you, I was kind of surprised by this myself. So I'd initially heard of this issue with Silencer Central was one of the first channels. There's a company that sells suppressors, and they had started seeing this issue of a lot of their instructional videos were being taken down and given strikes, and it was this was becoming a significant problem, and so they reached out to me to look into it. And this was before SHOT Show, so it would have been early January, and then as I was started to look into it, then I started to hear about more people, including yourself, who were affected by this. And obviously went up to even the very largest channel, I think, is Demolition Ranch. I believe is the most popular gun channel on the platform.
Probably,
and there may be others. I think he's at like 11.2 million, something like that. And he had one of his videos taken down, Grantham. It'd be just basically every very popular gun channel. And that's when I, figured, well, I should reach out to YouTube and try to see if there's they're going to offer up some explanation for what's going on or something, because usually they don't. But this time, surprisingly, they did. Like they got back to me, which sort of indicates to me that they were sort of concerned about the backlash that had unfolded.
They got back to you, but they didn't actually explain anything. Like I was saying, they can demonetize videos, and that's what they normally do. And once a video is demonetized, there is no advertiser concern with it because an advertisement will never show up on it. What they were doing on this was actively deleting content completely off the platform. And that is novel for YouTube. Like, we haven't run into that before. And for creators, that's downright frightening. There was no communication of any change in the actual rules. There was, in fact, no change in any of the written rules that we have, that we're able to see. And yet channel videos were being essentially at random hit with channel strikes. And for anyone who makes their living on YouTube, 3 channel strikes and you're gone. It's the equivalent of walking into your job and just having a pink slip on your desk out of
No, you're
absolute
technically
nowhere.
not allowed to create a new channel after that too, right? In a lot of
I
cases.
believe that is correct. I don't think
their
that's really
policy.
well enforced.
Right.
But yeah, technically you're not
some people
allowed to
were doing that,
participate
but
on YouTube again.
yeah, I believe you're not allowed to create another channel if you get deleted off the platform like that. But yeah, no, certainly one of the things they told me actually was that they did not change their policy. But some of the things they told me and what they were actually doing, I don't think totally line up, because they had told me that there was no policy change, nothing in their firearms policy had changed recently. So what was written in there, and I think they changed it, the written rules, about a year ago, if I'm remembering correctly. And so essentially their line is that this was not the result of any sort of change in our policies. And, we fixed it once we figured out there was an issue, but, and we reviewed things, right? But every creator that I have spoken to on this story said that they all tried to appeal these decisions. And not only were they denied, but generally they were like immediately denied within a few minutes, which sort of indicates, especially the widespread nature of it and these appeal denials, indicates that this was a policy decision at some level, at least maybe not a change in written policy, but a change in how they were interpreting their policy. I mean, is that what it seemed like to you?
Absolutely. And for I feel like there are a lot of elements of this that are common knowledge to creators that will be maybe hopefully surprising to people who only watch YouTube from the outside. One of them is YouTube does not tell you why they take down a video. It's just gone and you've got a channel strike. And so it wasn't like they said you can't put suppressors on guns, and they didn't, but nothing was communicated. The only reason that we as a group of creators were able to figure out that the thing that was at risk was the physical act of attaching a suppressor to a firearm is all of us individually comparing notes and looking what had happened to other people. And
right.
And even then, when I got my first strike on a video, I was concerned, and so I went in and I spent an entire day going through my entire back archive of videos, looking for every situation where I might have put a suppressor on a gun. And I proactively deleted 6 or 8 other videos because you have no warning. There's no appeal to this. I mean, there's an appeal button, but what we saw from the creator community was that there was no appeal. You hit appeal and it's just immediately rejected. And then there's nothing. At least one of the channels that was deleted was one that got hit by like 3 strikes all in quick succession in the middle of the night. And so the channel owner wakes up and his channel's just gone. He didn't have a chance to even try to appeal anything because 3 of them in a row and that's it, you're out.
Yeah. And, that's very typical, I think, of how major social media sites handle moderation these days. And there's this sort of philosophy behind this approach where they're not going to tell you exactly what the rules are or exactly how they're going to be applied, because from their point of view, they believe that will lead to bad actors exploiting the rules and finding loopholes. For those who follow along the gun control debate, as probably everyone who listens to this show does, this logic probably sounds fairly familiar to everyone. The so-called loopholes that exist in our gun laws, the same sort of idea. You see these fights playing out with things like assault weapons bans, where California is constantly changing their rules, or Massachusetts is implementing the copycat rule. There's sort of like anything that we think is too close to what some of the guns we banned is also banned, but we're not going to tell you exactly what that means. There's a similar sort of logic to it. The concern is that people will try to use the exact wording of a rule to then circumvent the rule. And so that's why you end up in these situations where they have written rules, but you still, as a creator, have to kind of guesstimate exactly what that means when you're publishing content to a platform. And if you guess wrong, game over, basically.
And this is made more complicated on YouTube by the fact that the people who write the rules for YouTube don't know squat about guns. I noticed they did recently tweak them and they changed this, but I'm still going to use it as my example. For a very long time, the rules prohibited you from monetizing any video that featured thermal ammunition. And I defy you to tell me what thermal ammunition is. People are going to say, well, maybe it's tracers. Well, maybe it is.
Maybe.
I don't know. If it was tracers, they could have said tracer, except that I'm quite convinced that whoever wrote those rules doesn't know the term tracer. Like, they don't know anything about guns. When their way to prohibit monetization of machine gun videos is to say that you may only monetize videos that show non or semi-automatic weapons.
Right.
It's like, so you take someone who doesn't actually, this is like the whole rule set is a big game of telephone, because the rules have been written by someone who has only this vague idea that they don't want scary stuff, but they don't know how to actually explain what that is. Those rules are then given out they're deliberately written in a vague manner, and then they're enforced by what I've come to believe are essentially call center staff, probably mostly overseas, who have even less technical knowledge, probably, and who knows what their subjective proclivities are on the matter. These are rules that are impossible to try to
comply with. And that's really that sort of call center staff, the minimum wage people, which, by the way, anyone who doesn't know how major social media companies handle moderation, that the first people that you get to, besides the fact that that's probably like the third level of moderation that you're at, there's a lot of algorithms involved in flagging videos, and because they have to be fair, they do have to monitor, hundreds of hours of video is uploaded every second to YouTube. And so there's no way to physically have somebody go through all of it, even with the resources of a company like Google. And so they have to rely on, algorithmic moderation, and then another layer of algorithmic moderation. And then you get to these sort of call center minimum wage people who go through probably thousands of videos an hour, clicking on whether this is okay or this is bad, and Facebook does the same thing. I've dealt with a lot of these large companies, and I think people would expect that, they've got a lot of money. They could just hire somebody like you or somebody else who has a knowledge of firearms. So at the very least, at least bring them in as a consultant so they could say, well, hey, this is why this particular rule doesn't make sense or what have you. But, I'll be honest with you, in my experience with large companies like this, that's really not how they operate. They don't put effort into that kind of thing. Even something like Walmart, right? Where Walmart used to be the largest ammunition dealer, it might still be, frankly, at this point in the country, right? And after the El Paso shooting, they decided they wanted to change their policy on selling guns and ammunition. And they put out this statement that was clearly written by somebody who doesn't know anything about firearms. And they had made these strange decisions on, we're still going to sell ammunition, but it's only going to be like ammunition that's we are deeming useful for hunting, and not ammunition that is scary, like you said. A lot of this stuff is based on sort of high-level executives' feelings about firearms. Honestly, that's what it seems like, and people who don't really know anything about them. And when I talked to Walmart in that situation, I talked to one of their PR, executives on this decision, and they clearly didn't know anything about firearms. I was asking them questions like, "Why are you getting rid of 9mm or 5.56, but you're keeping like these high caliber hunting rifle rounds available? Like, what is the logic here? It doesn't make a lot of sense." And this person didn't really know anything about firearms. You'd think even Walmart, they have people who buy the ammunition to resell. They must have somebody there that understands the basics of firearms ammunition and why their position didn't really hold water and make a lot of sense to somebody who owns guns. And but they just didn't put that level of effort into it. And YouTube's even less so. They're not even trying to sell ammunition, right? Walmart's trying to sell you ammunition. At the same time, the high level executives clearly don't know much about the market or the consumer. And so you run into these situations where you have these large companies that could hire more informed people, but they just don't do it. And it leads to stuff like this. And it leads to this environment that you described for creators, especially gun creators, where it's difficult to, I think, see like the best path forward. And so I'm interested in your point of view on this as somebody who runs a major gun channel, who makes a living creating gun content. Where do you see the best path forward with the future of gun-related content on the internet?
I see a lot of potential paths. For someone in my position, a lot of it is going to be reactive in nature. I think if I were running YouTube, even if if they let me run it, but put on a specific set of conditions of we're only going to allow this sort of content, I would have to think that the thing I would do would be to actually institute a program where at least large channels have representatives, people they can actually talk to. They're treated like actual partners. YouTube calls their system the partner program, but the partner point is a complete joke. There's no partnership at all. You're allowed to run ads on your videos. If YouTube had some system whereby at a certain scale, you're actually treated like a partner and perhaps trusted, you wouldn't have to have weird algorithmic decisions made on well-established channels. If you had a system with actual trustworthy humans who could vouch for trustworthy channels, and of course there'd be some mechanism for revoking that trust if it's abused, but like that's a system of partnership. To me, that's a sustainable, mutually beneficial system. And clearly that's the sort of thing that goes on with the entertainment industry on YouTube. If I was running a TV channel, I am pretty sure that the rules are different for me on YouTube than if I am actually an independent creator.
That's true.
Now, from a creator's...
even in the silencer situation, I guarantee they weren't striking, Universal's YouTube channel for every time a silencer is screwed on in a movie, or really like gamers, for instance. Like that was the other problem with this interpretation that they had for that several months of like, what are you trying to even accomplish with this? Like, first of all, attaching a suppressor to a gun is not some sort of high level operation that requires a lot of brain power. And second of all, it's in all kinds of media beyond gun tuber videos. You know what I mean? Like, what are you trying to accomplish?
It's also worth pointing out that, and this is a little bit hazy to me because, again, none of this was actually formally put in place. But I've had people tell me that they got channel strikes for attaching optics to firearms, like for mounting a red dot on a gun, and also for attaching 30-round magazines, like for just clipping them, putting a magazine into a gun. I can't verify that beyond what I'm being told, partly because the channel owner wasn't actually told a specific.
I did ask about the magazine thing and didn't get an explicit response to it. Just again, that the same sort of, we haven't changed our policy. There's no change in policy was sort of the main point that they were trying to get across to me when I was talking to them. I was sending them all these videos, and to their credit, they did actually go through, and it seems as though they've restored all the videos they said they were going to, and the channels that had been affected. So they did actually follow through on what they said they were going to do. But yeah, as far as explanation for why this happened or why they reversed themselves, really didn't get anything to that regard, other than just creators were upset. We reviewed it, and so we realized that we'd made a mistake. That is basically the summation of their point of view. And so you said here what you think YouTube should do, or what an ideal situation would be with, a real partners program. But one, I imagine obviously you don't think they're going to do that. Yeah.
Oh God, no, of course not.
So I guess the question now, and you've been exploring this for years, to be fair, is what do you do as someone with a significant audience on YouTube, but who realizes the dangers in a unreliable platform like that? And so how do you see yourself progressing forward from this point?
So the way I see it, there are two large families of, when it comes to large gun channels, there are two different schools of thought. One of them is based on sort of a Patreon or Utreon style model of direct viewer support. And one of them is based on YouTube monetization and sponsorship. And none of these are hard and fast lines. Everyone is pretty much a combination of both. But for a channel like mine that is primarily supported directly by users, that's a much smaller number of users than the views that a big channel can get on YouTube. So
Right.
I can take my content and put it on another alternative platform. And as long as I have a way to get my videos in front of the eyes of the people who are actually paying for them, my channel can survive.
Mm-hmm. Very similar to how the Reload works, frankly, to be honest. Membership support. That's a classic model for running a business like this. But if you can do that, why not just leave YouTube altogether?
Because people are always leaving a Patreon style system, and you need to have a funnel to bring in new people who haven't been aware of your work, who are going to be interested in it. And YouTube is far and away, without any competition at all, the biggest platform for viewing. And so for the Reload, I'm sure it works this way for Forgotten Weapons as well. You get a lot of people watching your free content on YouTube who go, wow, this stuff's really cool. I like it. I want to support the Reload and I want to read more. I'll go join the membership program. And so if you have to move to an alternate platform that has 1%, if that many, as many views, you lose that funnel, and it's a significant barrier to long-term growth of a channel.
Right. Now, and even beyond the business aspect of it, because that all makes sense from a business standpoint too. Obviously what you do also carries with it a sort of activism, a cultural activism and political activism. But is that another reason why you wouldn't want to leave, this large platform as well?
Absolutely. I mean, really, if you're getting into the business of making YouTube videos, you're getting into the business of creating content to show to people. And so it's always going to be the case, I think, that you want to show it to as many people as possible. And YouTube is by far the best platform because it has the most views. And there's the second group of channels that I would look at where they're primarily supported by sponsorships and YouTube monetization as well. And those two mechanisms are both directly dependent on number of views, not necessarily a hardcore, small nugget of viewer base that's willing to financially pay for it themselves, but just views from everybody, because that's what sponsors are looking for. They want to get their message to the largest possible audience. For those platforms, and a lot of these guys, by the way, it's not like one dude in his basement with a camera. A lot of these are real companies that have hired 3, 4, 10, 12 people. Like, they have payroll, they have major expenses to maintain. And moving to an alternate platform where they go from getting 1 million views on every video to getting 5,000 views on every video, the sponsorship money all completely goes away, because it's not viable for a sponsor to pay the same sort of money for 1% as much traction. And so for a lot of those channels, alternative platforms just, I think, that's not me, so I'm speculating here a bit, but the alternative platforms are just not a viable alternative for them, and they are going to fight tooth and nail to stay on YouTube.
Do you see any sort of replacement for YouTube coming up? I mean, Facebook video was a big thing for a couple of years, and then that fell flat. Elon has talked about trying to create some sort of, partnership program for creators on Twitter and to extend the length of videos that you can upload there. I mean, is there any, Utreon is obviously something you use, but are any of these things real competitors to YouTube in this sort of way?
So the best one that I think exists right now is Utreon. And frankly, they're largely the best because, and I think they did this with Othaius's advice, they've focused on competing with Patreon instead of trying to directly compete with YouTube. They've been a very viable platform for me, certainly still a far second to YouTube, but very good for what they are. And I think they have very good growth potential. What could happen in the future? Whoever knows. There's lots of social media platforms out there that that used to be big and are now essentially a footnote. And there's nothing to say that next year YouTube won't have some fantastically successful competitor and go away, or at least lose its dominant position. At the same time, one of the other big concerns to me as a person who produces long form content, and this I think covers most of the firearms YouTube community as well, all of the social media platforms are really focusing on very short form content, 30 to 60-second content. They want to be TikTok. The problem is they see themselves going away in competition with TikTok. Well, my 20-minute video on the nuances of, you know, how Mauser production changed between 1920 and 1923, that's never going to live on a TikTok 60-second viral video.
Right.
And it may very well be that, I mean, all of these platforms, your views do not come just from people actively searching for your content. That's generally a very small proportion. Most of your views come from active recommendations from an algorithm, where someone watches a video, and at the end of that, the platform suggests to them a couple other videos that they might also like based on what they've watched. And if platforms, as they're seeming to do, focus on only recommending, you know, attention-grabbing 30-second dance videos, nothing against dancing, but our sort of long-form informative content is going to go away, you know, or it's going to be inhibited substantially. Although
I'd imagine there's some Gun Jesus fan cam videos out there on TikTok that are probably pretty popular, but this is actually
want to know.
So if you find them, put them down in the comments. But if this is actually something that I know has been affecting your channel more generally as well, the sort of algorithmic changes at YouTube itself have harmed your view counts in recent months. Isn't that right?
Yeah. When YouTube updated its rules in April, I saw about a 50% decrease in views of older videos. So day to day, you know, each new video that I uploaded tended to do just as well as it had done before April. But the recommendations of old catalog videos were, you know, they dropped substantially. And the creators that I talk to who are in the same sort of space, the other guys who are doing the more educational, informative, nerdy, boring gun content, all saw the same thing.
I don't think it's boring, but yes. There's a lot of people I think would agree it's not boring, but certainly not the TikTok form. TikTok. I sound like a geriatric man. TikTok format, which YouTube has, of course, leaned into with Shorts, basically just a total ripoff of TikTok, and Twitter is also sort of ripping off TikTok with the For You stuff. And anyway, it's obviously Instagram with Reels. Certainly, that's the new hotness. You know, everybody stole Snapchat's little disappearing 24-hour posts, and now everybody's stealing TikTok's various innovations, if you can call them that. So certainly it seems like a pretty bleak outlook. What is it that you see happening with gun content on YouTube and the internet generally, and your channel specifically for the next couple of years here? How are you approaching this landscape?
The key to me, that what I've come to realize, is I need to focus on recognizing the fact that my success comes from a core group of very dedicated, very nerdy people who love boring content. Like, I'm exaggerating here, but
you're underselling it. It's not boring. I mean, maybe I'm just one of those people, but it's not boring.
But that is the group of people who fundamentally make my work possible. They give me a day job and a paycheck. And I need to remember to not be concerned with trying to make viral hit splash videos. That those are great. Don't get me wrong. I'd love it if every video I did got a bajillion views. But in order to be successful, I need to always remember the fundamentals of what I'm doing, which is creating a digital archive of firearms history. And as long as I do that, forgotten weapons will survive. It's easy to to look at someone else doing better, or look at conditions generally looking like they're worse than they were last year and get discouraged by things. And I think it's more important to recognize that there is still an unbelievable opportunity out there, that 20 years ago, none of this was even technologically possible. And so it really is a blessing to be able to do what I do. And I will continue to do it until something changes that makes it impossible for me to do. I don't need to try and hop off a bus because, well, the elevator slowed down a bit, so I better go find something else to do. No, I can and will keep doing this until something actually physically prevents me from doing so, because I love it. I love what I do. I get rejuvenation and energy from finding that cool new old gun that I've never seen before, and tearing it apart and learning its history and learning its backstory. And that's what I need to focus on.
Absolutely. And look, I think that really comes through in the videos, which is why they're not boring. But let's focus on that positive side of things there for a little bit more here. What do you want to do with the channel that you haven't done up to this point? What are the sort of new avenues? I mean, obviously you're still going to make a lot of the core videos that you enjoy, these teardowns and these fascinating forgotten weapons, as the channel's name implies. But what are some of the new things we might see from you in the next year or the next couple of years moving forward?
Right now, my bigger project is, well, not bigger, but my newer project is working a little bit more on book content, book production.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I have two in particular that I'm in process of doing right now that I frankly found that I love the process of researching and writing books. So I'm working on one on the history of silencers, and I'm working on one on, yeah, right. Exactly. And I'm working on one on Finnish firearms. And so I'm excited about those. I'm going to be spending a lot of my time working on those projects. Basically, I'm not trying to do anything really huge and new and splashy in terms of video content. I'm going to maintain the standard of video content that I've been doing, and use my additional time to work on some books this year.
And you got to continue to incorporate some of that book research into the videos like you've done the last year or so.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I finished doing the chapter on the Maxim Silencer Company, and found all sorts of really cool stuff that I hadn't realized before that will make for some really good videos on Maxim silencers and some of the technology surrounding that when we get to the point that the book's ready to go.
Yeah. You just did a video on, short barrel rifles and how that sort of became a thing in American law and sort of controversy, and how it made its way into the NFA and so forth. I wonder if something like that about silencers wouldn't be, in the book, in the cards should, too.
Because the story is almost as good. Yeah. Yeah. It's not quite as obvious, cut and dried of a thing as it was with the short barreled stuff. But yeah, the legal rationale for suppressors in the NFA is equally stupid.
And it's fascinating the way that device has become divisive. Didn't mean to use that alliteration there, but it works. In America for firearms, when it's also a device that we require on all cars. It's the same exact concept and technology.
And made by the same company.
Yeah.
Like it was the Maxim. Maxim had two companies. He had the Maxim Silent Firearms Company, and he had the Maxim Silencer Company. And when he started, the muffler he would sell you for your car or your little industrial engine was called a silencer, because they were noisy and he didn't want them to be noisy. So you'd silence them.
Yeah, it's a fascinating bit of history, how things turn the way they do, especially when they're connected to firearms. And so, I look forward to that book and to perhaps some videos on the topic as well. On more of the political history. That's obviously where I focus more on. But tell us about some upcoming videos that perhaps you're working on that you're excited about. Maybe
I normally don't like teasing stuff in case it doesn't actually work out. Like stuff can fall apart for any number of reasons, but the really cool one right now that I'll tease just because it's you, is hopefully I will be doing some video in which I essentially airborne assault out of an Alouette helicopter in lizard stripe with a MAP 49.
Oh, that sounds
which I'm
fun.
really excited for. That's going to be so cool and so much fun. And
yeah, I imagine.
I really hope it works out.
That's fantastic. And that's another thing I enjoy about your channel is that there's sort of the bread and butter stuff of the disassemblies and the, showing us the guns and taking them to the range and shooting them and how they function in their history. But then you also get into military history as well, and going to battlefields, going to historical places where historical events took place and explaining those, and then even getting into some modern firearms too, like the Lago Alien was one that you were excited about last year. You've done a couple of these, not just historical guns, but some of these modern firearms that are doing things a little bit differently than the rest of the market. Are there any of those that you have seen lately that have sort of piqued your interest?
I'm pretty interested in several of the new guns that showed up at SHOT Show this year. So
I have one, Island, and so I'm wondering.
The Rock Island 5.0 is one of them. That's probably the one you were thinking of.
Yes.
I definitely want to get my hands on one of those and play with it. I'm also really interested in Smith & Wesson's 5.7. It appears to have a pretty intriguing, basically it's a gas-assisted rotating barrel lockup. Not entirely sure because I was fondling one at SHOT, but they wouldn't let me take it apart, and they wouldn't go away and leave me alone long enough to do it without them noticing.
Well, they probably knew who you were, so
word gets around, I guess. But I'm very interested in that. Like there was a company there that's making carbon fiber suppressors that weigh like nothing, and that was very intriguing to me. So it's not always the really fancy technology. Sometimes it's the simple stuff that's just a little bit different, a little bit innovative that can be, I think, really interesting. I love the technology for technology's sake.
Yeah. Same here. I mean, obviously the market's full of Browning tilt barrel actions, and it's that way for a reason. It's very reliable and good design, but it's always interesting when there's something a little bit different, even if it's something that, or maybe especially if it's something that borrows from technology that was in some of these forgotten weapons from the past. And, it's interesting to see how they get applied in modern firearms. And that RIA 5.0 is one of those examples of a gun that's uses a totally different recoil system from what most other firearms use, just like the Lago Alien does as well, except the big difference is that the Lago Alien is $5,000 and the RIA is $900. So I might actually buy one of those.
I want to get that Rock Island and see how similar it is to my Type 94 NAM. Because apparently they're both vertically traveling locking blocks.
Yep. But it's a proprietary design of that system. So it's certainly interesting. I mean, it also shares a lot with the CZs, with the low bore axis, and pretty fascinating firearm, especially from a company like that too. That's really evolved in the last couple of years here from what they used to do, making like surplus 1911s in the old Filipino factories.
For sure.
And introducing their own proprietary designs of really interesting guns. But yeah, so we're going to look forward to seeing, especially the video that you did. We're kind enough to tease for us here, and maybe and basically anything else you put out, because I personally do like to watch all of them. And so, but we also appreciate you coming on and giving us this perspective as somebody who got caught up in this YouTube ordeal, I guess we can call it, and someone who's probably going to be caught up in more down the line, unfortunately, but that is
I'm sure
the nature of this thing. So maybe when another one of these happens, we could have you back on, or perhaps we could have you on again for something, more fun in the future.
If it were easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
Exactly. But tell people before you leave where they can find you and support the work you're doing.
So I have my own standalone website at forgottenweapons.com. Of course, I'm on YouTube. If you're interested in supporting the show, I would request that you take a look at either patreon.com/forgotten weapons or utreon.com forgotten weapons. So I have links to all of those in the description of every one of my videos. I am also on Rumble. I didn't bring up Rumble because it doesn't seem to be that great of an effective site for at least my kind of video content, but my whole channel is mirrored over there. So if Rumble is your choice, I'm on Rumble as well. You can see me there.
There you go. All right. Well, we're going to head over to our news update now. Thanks so much for joining us.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the weekly news update. I'm contributing writer, joined, of course, by Reload founder Steve Gutowski. How you doing this week, Steve?
I'm doing pretty well, Jake. The Eagles are about to head to the Super Bowl. I think the members will get to listen to this before that happens, but everyone else will hear it after the game is over. So you'll have a pretty good idea of what my mood is at that time when you're listening to this. If you listen anytime after Sunday night, I'll either be very, very happy, maybe hanging on a light pole on Broad Street somewhere, or very unhappy, I guess would be the other way it could go. I'm feeling pretty confident, though, which actually makes me kind of nervous. Just that the feeling that we should win is not one I like.
Well, honorary Go Birds to your Eagles from me, because I don't want to see my division rivals win the Super Bowl again. So hopefully you are in a good mood next week. But on to the news of the week. We just published a series of pieces about some internal documents we obtained from the NRA, which paint a fairly negative picture of the direction the organization is headed in. If you want to tell us a little bit about your piece.
Yeah, so things do not look good for the NRA right now. I know that's probably something we've said for a couple of years, but the big news out of the internal documents that we obtained this time around is the NRA has lost over 1 million members since corruption allegations surfaced against Wayne LaPierre and other members of NRA leadership back in 2019. 2018 was their best year ever for membership. Depends on the source you use. They had claimed 6 million at one point. Andrew Arulanundam, who's the spokesperson for the NRA, had claimed 5.5 later that year. The internal documents that we've gotten show that at least by the end of 2018, they were not at 5.5 million, but they do appear to be over 5.3 million. And this year, at the most recent board meeting last month, Wayne LaPierre, according to multiple sources that I spoke with, said that the organization now has 4.3 million members, which actually makes it the smallest it's been since 2012 when they had 4 million members.
Yeah, and no, this is a really big deal for an organization like the NRA for a couple of reasons. One is, despite some of the misconception you hear out there from particularly gun control advocates and maybe folks who don't quite understand the dynamics, is that the NRA, gets its clout from the lobbying dollars it spends, when in reality, it's because they've had millions of members that they could easily mobilize to get to the polls, to pressure politicians. So the strength of the organization, the very heart of the organization, is its membership. And to see it decline by 1 million members in just a few years is definitely a rough sign for the organization.
Yeah, it's not good at all. And of course, the other thing to keep in mind about the NRA and its membership is, as you alluded to there, the membership is what drives revenues for the NRA. That's where they actually get their money from, is from these millions of people who pay them dues or give them contributions throughout the year. And so with this loss of membership, they've also experienced a massive loss in revenue. They're down over $100 million. And, since very recently, and that has created huge holes in their budgets. Their budgeting process is another topic that we might get into because it seems rather bizarre, to put a single word on it. But they had projected to bring in far more money from membership than they did, and they projected to spend far less money on legal fees than they actually did. They spent almost 50% more on legal fees than they had planned to last year. And that's really blew this huge hole in their budget that, it was like a $44 million hole but the shortfall between their revenue and their expenses, which they sought to cover with massive loan. Essentially, they borrowed against their line of credit to the tune of $23 million, and they still had an $11 million shortfall after that. So they're obviously not doing so well right now from a financial standpoint. And it really raises the question of how long they can keep going this way.
No, that's right. Yeah. To try to patch up your revenue shortfalls with loans is definitely not a sustainable long-term solution. You sort of alluded to their budgeting thought process going forward. And they seem to project going forward that they're going to, make up some of the lost membership that they went under budget this year. And, maybe we'll see, but it's not, next year's not exact. It's not an election year. There's not really the same drivers that you would typically see to, have drive gun rights people to an organization like the NRA. So it's definitely just, they're on a rough track in terms of how they're going to make up that revenue shortfall.
Yeah, that's what makes 2022's numbers particularly bad, because they were in a really good situation for NRA membership growth. 2022 was an election year that also saw a mass shooting, one of the worst mass shootings in history, which drove political pressure to pass a new gun control bill, which actually did happen in spite of the NRA's efforts, sort of indicating that their political power is diminished as well because of all this. But even though you had this fight for control of Congress, you had a president in office who is committed to instituting new gun restrictions, even gun bans. The president, one of our other stories this week is that he renewed his call for an assault weapons ban during his State of the Union address, even though the day before a new poll had shown that a majority of Americans actually oppose assault weapons bans now. Bans on, obviously, assault weapons is sort of a nebulous term, but generally they target firearms like the AR-15 or the AK-47, but usually they affect far more firearms than just those two popular examples. But you have this driving force, something that has traditionally pushed people to want to sign up for an NRA membership to show their opposition to new gun restrictions, right? That's what happened in 2018. That's why they had such a good year in 2018. You had a midterm election and you had the Parkland shooting, which led to a renewed push for new federal gun control laws. And so as a result, the NRA saw record membership at that time. But in 2022, the same sort of political atmosphere that should generate new membership, new members for the NRA, instead you saw a drop-off, and you saw a drop-off in the number of members that they were able to sign up compared to what they had planned to sign up. And you also saw a drop-off in the number of members who renewed compared to what the NRA thought they were going to see.
Yeah. And as we said before, that drove a big revenue shortfall, but it also kind of highlighted maybe some of the wisdom or lack thereof in some of their other spending priorities. You already pointed out their legal fees were way over budget, but we also discovered in a story I published, one of their line items showed that they were spending, over $1.2 million on private jet travel, which, doesn't seem like something that's very common among nonprofit organizations. But second of all, to do that when you're running $11 million deficits with a $30 million line of credit patch over that, it's just sort of a weird priorities, I think, when it comes to spending for an organization that's going through a bit of a financial rough patch.
Yeah, and it's especially troubling at the NRA because that has been one of the core criticisms that former members who no longer give to the NRA and no longer buy memberships have levied against the organization. Is that Wayne LaPierre in particular has used private jet travel extensively and without really good justification. They have said in the past that this is for security reasons. And certainly Wayne LaPierre has security concerns. I think that those are legitimate. He's been, I'm sure he gets death threats all the time. He's been swatted. There's people who would like to kill Wayne LaPierre. Like, that's the reality. But at the same time, that's true of many people in public life, including every senator, right? And I've personally seen senators flying commercial at Reagan International. That's generally how they get around. They might have security with them, but most high profile politicians still travel commercial on airlines. Like at a certain level, you know, the security question can't cover every luxurious expense that the NRA undertakes. You know, they use the same excuse for why they had to pay for, mosquito treatments at Wayne's house, or why they were going to buy him an entire mansion in Texas. This was,
right.
This was used repeatedly. This is why he had to go on the yacht trips from one of the contractors that does business with the NRA, that owns this giant yacht that Wayne has spent a lot of time on. That was also the excuse he gave during the bankruptcy, was that it was for security reasons. He was concerned after Sandy Hook, so he had to go on this yacht with a bunch of celebrities and rich people. And at a certain point, that security excuse starts to wear thin. And, I think the private jet travel is one of the less convincing areas where security concerns can justify what they're doing. And yeah, I mean, like, they're still doing it. That's the thing. Like, it's been 4 years since those accusations first broke. Wayne had to pay back the NRA $300,000 for private jet travel where he wasn't even on the jets. It was for his family members. And of course, he got a raise to match that amount of money that he had to pay back. So he didn't really end up paying anything back to the NRA for that. But you get the idea. He admitted faults for that. And it's been a core complaint of a lot of people who stopped joining the NRA, who stopped renewing their memberships, was that they feel their money is wasted because it's going towards stuff like Wayne's luxury travel. And we don't know, of course, to caveat that these particular private jet trips that the NRA paid for last year were for Wayne himself, although I'd be very surprised to find out that it was for somebody else, or at least that Wayne didn't partake. Perhaps other people also travel by private jet at the NRA, but we don't know that because the NRA wouldn't respond to our questions this time. They used to respond. They at least would give some sort of justification or plan for how they are going to make up these shortfalls. But now they've just stopped even talking about this at all.
No, that's exactly right. And it's tough to see. Like, you made the good caveat that we don't know exactly what this private jet travel was for, if it was more of the same trend in the past where it was improper. But it's worth noting that this corruption lawsuit that they've been dealing with from the New York Attorney General is still a very much a live proposition. So I think it's a little bit of a red flag to see that private jet travel is still a big line item in their expense to the tune of 7 figures, while it's still a very much live proposition that the New York Attorney General is seeking the removal of LaPierre and many other executives for similar purchases in the past. Definitely worth keeping an eye on, I think.
To be honest, at this point, it doesn't seem like they are changing any of their behaviors because of this potential legal punishments that the Attorney General can levy. Because, I mean, one of the things we didn't even report on this because there's just so much out there. But another thing that happened at the most recent board meeting is that the board passed a resolution that allows Wayne to, by his own desire, sell off the entire collection that the NRA has of firearms, including in the museum, without any oversight from the board. There used to be that the board is supposed to approve those sorts of sales, but now it's the board is again sort of shirking its duty off onto LaPierre, which is another thing that is at the core of this legal fight over the NRA, is that the board doesn't provide the sort of oversight it's supposed to provide in a lot of cases. That's the accusation, right? And so a lot of these things that got them into this situation in the first place, they're just continuing to do. At this point, you start to wonder when you look at these numbers for the NRA, because, as we talked about earlier, the budget that they projected for next year, which we've also published, is not realistic in any way. They're projecting themselves to gain 20% in membership revenue. There's no explanation for how they're going to do that. All the things we said about 2022 and why it should have been a good year for NRA growth, all those are gone essentially for 2023. It's an off year. There's no election. In political nonprofits, that means you get fewer donations and fewer memberships almost inevitably. There can be exceptions to that, of course, but almost every time you're seeing you're likely to see fewer people give you money in that time period, not more, certainly not a 20% increase. And so that's another question the NRA just wouldn't answer, is like, how are you getting to these numbers? They don't seem realistic. And if they aren't realistic, then that budget is done in a way that has them exactly even at the end of the year, so that they aren't projecting themselves a surplus before investments, and they aren't projecting themselves a deficit. They're projecting themselves to break exactly even if things go exactly to plan. But that plan, it doesn't seem remotely realistic. And so, it's hard to know. It's hard to see how they could cut programs further than this point without completely eliminating some of their key core services. And they're getting to a point where you wonder how much more of a credit line they actually have left to use. And so the downward spiral, as Brian Mittendorf, this accounting professor at Ohio State University, called it, could be really accelerating this year.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's the long-term sustainability of the organization is for sure called into question, I think, by this. You never know. Things can change. There's nothing's for certain, but that we've seen a repeated pattern year after year after year of sort of the similar story: decline in membership, decline in revenue, / core services to members, and spike legal fees and other lavish expenses like the private jet, for example. And it's just, you have to wonder how long you can continue to do that before you see a precipitous drop off in membership, even more than we've already seen and what you've already reported on. It's just tough to see how they pull out of this without some serious changes being made, or, for example, the New York Attorney General's lawsuit succeeding and a entire cleaning house of the top executives. So it's tough to see where they go from here, but we'll for sure be on top of whatever they decide to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's just clearly no will inside of the organization to change direction at this point. The board is totally captured by Wien. Like the board is almost unanimously supportive of everything he does. And so anyone thinking that there may be some sort of, wake up call for board members because of numbers like this, it's just not going to happen. Like, it's extremely unlikely that the board will abandon Wayne, given how much control he has over the process of appointing board members, frankly. Like the nominating committee, all this stuff we've talked about previously, it's designed to weed out people who are not in line with what everyone else on the board is thinking. And so you occasionally get a few dissident members, but frankly, they're often pushed off the board fairly quickly after like one term or even a shortened term. And so, any hope for internal change at the NRA, I think, is pretty low. They didn't give us comment. They haven't tried to justify this massive loss in membership. But every other time they've spoken about what's going on at the NRA, the message has always been that things are good, things are fine, things are going well, and things are only going to improve from here. And so when that doesn't match up with reality, they just kind of ignore that. And so, anyone wondering if the NRA is going to turn itself around because they're bleeding members like this, like very unlikely that that's going to happen. And of course, one of the big problems with that is I think there's a lot of complacency out there in the gun rights movement over this. There's a lot of people who feel alienated from the NRA for either because of the whole corruption scandal or because they don't like the politics of the NRA or what have you, who feel that the alternative groups, which to be fair have grown in recent years, probably in part benefiting from people leaving the NRA. But at the same time, groups like Gun Owners of America, Second Amendment Foundation, Firearms Policy Coalition, while they are substantially bigger than they were several years ago, none of them cracked $10 million in revenue in 2021, according to their 990s that are available, the raw data on ProPublica. So you're talking about organizations that are tiny in comparison to the NRA. While they may be, you could certainly have arguments about efficiency, their use of their funds they have. They might be doing it more efficiently than the NRA or what have you. There's plenty of debate to be had on that. But for the terms of pure replacement value, it isn't a one-to-one. The people leaving the NRA aren't all going over to one of the alternative gun rights groups. It's just not happening. The NRA by itself lost $24 million between 2021 and 2022 last year, between 21 and 2022. So, it's losing. It's the shortfalls at the NRA on a yearly basis are matching what the other gun rights groups bring in for revenue total. It's like, if that makes sense, I'm just trying to get across the size difference here. It's massive.
Right. No, yeah, they for sure are still, even despite the year after year financial woes and membership decline, they're still the elephant in the room. And I think you bring up a good point about how when folks leave the NRA and try to go to one of these other organizations, it's not suddenly going to be an easy replacement because there's a bit of a splintering that goes on when someone gives to GOA, for example, and another gives to FPC. And you're really just not going to make up the same sort of heft and clout that an organization the size of the NRA has.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just frankly, the other groups aren't getting all the people who are leaving the NRA. That's just the bottom line, I think. Or at least they're not getting as much as the NRA used to get out of those people. And so, there isn't that level. It's not being made up. And none of those groups can rival the size of the NRA even now, even with the NRA shrinking like this. Even the gun control groups aren't anywhere near the size of the NRA, even today. And so that's something that I think gets overlooked still somehow, right? Is that the NRA, what happens with the NRA matters a lot in the gun debate. And it seems like people frankly, on both sides of the issue are happy to just think that the NRA doesn't matter anymore or what happens with it makes no difference. It's not true. And so that's why this kind of reporting is valuable, I think, in my mind. We've written this story basically several times over at this point. The NRA's in a downward spiral. Its finances are bleeding and they're losing members and nothing is changing internally there. But it's important to keep writing those stories because what happens with this organization matters a great deal for guns in America. So like you said, we're going to continue to follow this to wherever it goes. That's all we've got for this week. So make sure you come back again next week. If you like the kind of reporting that we're doing, if you value this sort of insight into what's going on in, YouTube, the largest social media group, platform in the world, the video platform, or the largest gun rights group in the world, the NRA, then you should head on over to thereload.com and pick up a membership today to support the reporting that we do. We are a completely member-funded independent publication. And if you don't want to make the jump into membership right away, you can also sign up for our free newsletter, or you can rate and like this podcast itself and share it with your friends to spread the word. We are available on all the major podcasting websites as well as on YouTube. So those are the ways that you can help us grow and help us reach more people and help us do more reporting as time goes on here. But that's all we've got for now. I'm going to end this one with a nice Go Birds.